American Racing Snobs with you. I'm Tony Rizzuti, joined as always by my good friend Eric Morse. And Eric, we came into last weekend so excited that Formula One racing was back. Spa, big, fast racetrack. It had everything we wanted it to be for the weekend. Unfortunately, this was not the weekend that anybody in motorsport wanted to see.
Unfortunately, the death of Formula 2 driver Anthoine Hubert cast a pall over proceedings. It happened just after qualifying in the feature race for Formula 2. The race was abandoned and canceled, and also the sprint race on Sunday was canceled after the extent of the injuries to both he and Juan Manuel Correa, the two main factors in that incident. And Tony, I don't know if you got a chance to see it. It was absolutely lurid. I'm trying not to be morbid about this sort of thing, but I do want to understand what happened so you can speak intelligibly and kind of understand what could have been done differently. And when you watch this, I noticed that on the line cut, they didn't show replays. The TV director for Formula 2 was showing Eau Rouge as the top drivers came racing through it, and then cut to the crash in progress. I have seen some footage that, and also read recently some accounts that kind of shed some light onto how they got into that situation. Most people who were aware of the wreck knew that Anthoine had crashed at the top of Eau Rouge into Raidillon, into the barriers, and then the stopped car was hit by Juan Manuel Correa. What I actually noticed was, as Hubert is going into the barriers, Giuliano Alesi, who qualified very well in the top 10, was going slowly through the middle of the racing line without a rear wing. So he had been off track and damaged his rear wing, and the field was checking up to avoid him. Looks like Hubert in the Arden made contact with another car in front of them. I believe it was Ralph Boschung, got into the barriers. Very heavy crash to begin with, but where it turned tragic was when, as the field came streaming through, Correa had nowhere to go. Looks like he had already lost his front wing by the time he just broadsided Anthoine Hubert, and unfortunately he succumbed to his injuries. Juan Manuel Correa is still in the hospital. Reports are that he has injuries to both of his legs and to his back, and he'll be having a lengthy rehabilitation after slamming into the side of another car doing 170 miles per hour, one of the scariest turns in F1. But Tony, it didn't look like this could be avoided. I don't see possibly a little bit more runoff area because the rebound effect of when Anthoine Hubert hit that barrier. But I don't really want to talk about the crash that much more. I would like to talk about the man, unless you have something you'd like to add there.
No, I was just going to say I've avoided watching any of the footage. I've seen a couple of things posted on YouTube. I haven't played them. Obviously, people trying to get clicks, and that's a sad world we live in, have put thumbnails to where you can pretty much imagine from the description what happened. I'm with you. As much as we sometimes complain about our drivers not making aggressive moves or, come on, lick the stamp and send it, auto racing in general, in any form of racing, whether it's go-karts, bicycles, motocross, NASCAR, Formula One, Indy, you name it, drag racing, anytime you add speed and the desire to be first, bad things can happen. And obviously the faster you go, the chances are they get worse and worse. And unfortunately, this is one of those times when, for whatever reason, this incident happened and it took the life of a young driver. I know there was a little bit of controversy over them canceling the race weekend. There are those that say he would have wanted it to go on. That's what we do. There are others that are saying, it's an undercard race. It just,
there was nothing to be gained by putting those drivers, and they're all young drivers.
I thought the FIA made the right call. I thought it was smart to cancel the race, have a group mourning with the F2 drivers that they did, with Anthoine's family, and then again with the Formula One. The hardest thing in all of this, Eric, is just for those Formula One drivers to pay tribute, many of them to childhood friend, somebody they've raced with a long time. More importantly, a racer, a colleague, to have to do that and then strap in, such a difficult thing. These guys are of such an elite mindset to be able to just flip that switch from saddened for their colleague to now it's my turn to go as fast as I can go. Just remarkable respect for what they do. Saddened, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the family, to all those friends, also to Correa, who's still in the hospital. Hopefully, his injuries won't be as bad as they sound and he can heal. But certainly, unfortunately, in this sport, it's something that we have to report and not one we like to report.
And as I was saying, these are young drivers. It's not like the Xfinity Series in NASCAR where you have, a lot of lifers who spend a lot of time in Formula 2. These are all 20-something to 22, 23-year-old drivers who are making their way up. They don't spend a lot of time there. It's usually a 2 or 3 year process through Formula 2. Anthoine Hubert was a rookie. He was a 2-time race winner this year at Monaco and his home circuit at Paul Ricard in the sprint races at both of those. Exciting young driver, very likable. He was also the reigning GP3 champion. There's a great obituary on motorsport.com. One of his friends happens to be a journalist who wrote a stunning piece about who he was and where he thought he was going. It's not like it's definitely a tragedy no matter how you look at it, but it looked like he had the front of the grid written all over him for next year because it's a pecking order. There are teams, even though it is mostly a spec series, it looked like he was going to upgrade and have a chance to fight for the championship. It's hard to say if he had the funding and backing to make it all the way to Formula One, but you look at his peers. There was a go-kart race, I think it was in 2011 or 2010 in France, that was the very first race for, get this, it was Anthoine Hubert, Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon, and Charles Leclerc all made their racing debut on the same karting weekend. He is part of the F1 fraternity, even if he never set foot in an F1 car. So the entire paddock was in mourning as we set up coming back from spring or summer shutdown. The summer break is over. You and I were giddy, and all of that excitement, it didn't go away, but it was certainly colored by the events of Saturday after Charles Leclerc won the pole position. 7/10 up on Sebastian Vettel. It was very hard for that young man to celebrate, especially since he was able to convert that into his first race victory. You feel for Charles. His career has kind of been defined by tragedy.
Yes, it has.
Outside of his driver's seat, being friends with Anthoine Hubert and being very close with Jules Bianchi, who was the last FIA driver to be killed back in 2014. He crashed at Suzuka and perished, maybe 7 or 8 months later. Yeah. From his injuries in that crash, the only fatality in Formula One since Ayrton Senna at Imola in 1994.
Yeah, just a tough weekend, but they did race. They did race the Belgian Grand Prix. It was fantastic. Qualifying went kind of how we expected it with the warmer conditions. We felt like Ferrari, we said going into it, if they were going to get this thing turned around and get to victory lane and get up on that podium in the top spot, it would probably be at Spa and Monza. They looked strong during practice. They looked strong during qualifying. And Eric, we're going to break down the race, but I gotta give you credit. Here's your chance to say I told you so. From the get-go, you thought it would be Charles Leclerc. I said it would be Hamilton. And if there was a bogey, it'd be Leclerc. We at least had the right red car. Charles Leclerc, much faster, much better on the tires than Sebastian Vettel.
He smashed Sebastian Vettel. Sebastian Vettel is in pieces right now because Charles Leclerc, 0.7 of a second in the same car is huge when it comes to qualifying. They weren't getting a toe off of one another. Those were both pretty clean laps, so that's down to driver ability. And then they get away, despite a little first corner tussle with Lewis Hamilton for Sebastian Vettel, they get away into a 1-2, but Leclerc was able to manage that race much better than Sebastian Vettel was. To the point where Vettel fell off the podium.
Yeah, but let's give Vettel a little bit of credit. I think he did as much as he could with worn-out tires to try to back up Lewis Hamilton. I felt like he could have fought him a little bit harder, but I think he backed him up enough because Lewis was literally one lap away from winning that race.
He was. There were a couple things that kept Lewis Hamilton from winning that race on pace because on that medium tire, Mercedes had the measure of Ferrari because when those Ferrari tires fell off the cliff, they were in trouble. Sebastian Vettel did his best Rubens Barrichello impression in that red car, holding up the field as Rubens famously did for Michael Schumacher as the most glorified wingman in Formula One history. Sebastian Vettel did not expect to be playing that role, but he played it well, and Maranello would still be shut out in the win column if it wasn't for the way Sebastian Vettel backed up his teammate once it was obvious that he didn't have anything for Charles Leclerc. So that's a lot of emotional maturity for Sebastian Vettel. I'm sure fourth place is not what he wanted. But let's talk about how he ended up on an alternate strategy, because it looked like Vettel was pitting to protect against an undercut. The undercut looked like it was going to work if you wanted to try it. Mercedes ended up waiting on that because Vettel ended up coming out behind Lando Norris. Mercedes wanted to see if they could pull a gap and get clean racetrack in front of Norris, and by the time that gap was open for Hamilton and Bottas, it didn't make sense to pit because they wouldn't have any chance of trying to pass Vettel. So they decided to go a little, at least on the pit lane. So they decided to go longer and have fresh tools to fight with at the end of the race, and it ended up being a masterstroke. They came up just short, and there were a couple of reasons why. The one you mentioned, Sebastian Vettel did a great job. When Hamilton caught Vettel, he was 2 seconds behind Leclerc. Once he cleared Vettel after 2 or 3 laps, it was 6.5 seconds. That 4.5 seconds was huge. Also, Mercedes did not have a great stop for Lewis Hamilton. He was about a second slower than Leclerc.
Yeah, 3.6, I believe.
It still sounds pretty quick to me, but a second on the racetrack is a second on the racetrack.
Yeah, Leclerc's was a 2.3. That's 1.2 or 3 seconds.
You know what the margin of victory was? It was like 0.9.
Yeah.
So there's your difference right there. Also, Vettel doing a great job being a team player, finally getting Ferrari their first victory of the season, although it falls to the young Frenchman, or actually the French Monegasque, Charles Leclerc. He is the first driver from Monaco to ever win a Formula One Grand Prix. Did you know that?
I did not, but I knew when they were playing the anthem, you don't hear it very often. And I was like, well, this is different.
It takes me back to those Formula 2 races I watched a couple of years ago when he was dominant back in 2017. I do have to give a shout-out to Louis Chiron, who is the most famous and most successful Monaco driver of all time. A lot of his exploits came before the war. So he was in his 50s by the time he became a Formula 1 driver. He was a Grand Prix winner and a Grand Prix of Monaco winner in the 1920s and 30s. However, Formula One, as we know it, the records all start in 1950. He did compete there, but he did not win. So history for Charles Leclerc.
At the time when you were watching it live, did you think Leclerc had made a mistake in the pit strategy, that they had left him out too long?
No, I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah?
Once Vettel was out of the way, they needed to cover what Mercedes was doing. I think everyone knew that Mercedes had a little bit better race pace, especially on the medium tire, based on what we saw in practice on Friday and Saturday. I think they knew that fight was coming. I think they played it perfectly. Now, well, if it was perfect, they would have finished 1-2, I think. But Mercedes was able to bluff because they had good enough pace to get Vettel out of the way. I think they pitted Vettel at the right time, and I thought it was a mistake by Mercedes to not pit. However, that proved wrong. Lewis thought it was a mistake, too, for the second straight race. He was complaining about the team's strategy in terms of getting them to the finish on that one-stopper this time. He was complaining in Hungary about the two-stopper that ended up winning him the race. However, Leclerc did not crack under pressure. We saw this happen in Austria where Verstappen was just throwing the kitchen sink at him, eventually got around him. I think, what's the old NASCAR cliche? You got to lose one before you can win one?
Yep.
He lost 2, one by mechanical and one by just getting outclassed by Max Verstappen at the end of the Austrian Grand Prix.
Well, and that was another race in which tires started to really go away on that Ferrari. And my question to you is, yeah, you're happy, right? Maranello's happy. They're back in victory lane. They're not going to get shut out. Coming up on Monza, home race, another track where you need tons of high speed and very little downforce. Really only need the downforce for the 2 little minor chicanes. Are you a little bit concerned that Mercedes seems to be, once tire wear starts to come into play, they can overcome all that? I'd be a little bit concerned.
If you're Ferrari?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. They were.
I mean, everything went their way. They got the track they wanted. They got the strategy right. They got a poor pit stop by Lewis and still almost blew it.
They didn't almost blow it. They almost got beat.
True.
They didn't beat themselves for once. They got the strategy right, whether that was on purpose or just by process of elimination. They finally got a car to the finish line first. I think that's just credit to Mercedes for being that good. Even though the car isn't that great in a straight line, even though there's going to be weather conditions and tracks that don't suit their car overall. They're still a force to be reckoned with, even when all the cards are against them.
Let's talk about the very beginning of the race, because one of the fan favorites anytime you go to Spa is going to be Max Verstappen. He obviously, with all the orange going on, is looking to put on a show. Your midfield MVP, Kimi Räikkönen, maybe gets around that track as well as anybody out there. And the two came together in turn one. It wasn't a great start for either, certainly put Max out of the race. Where did you see fault in turn number one, or was it just a racing deal?
I think 50% racing deal, 49% Verstappen fault. Kimi could have seen that in his mirror, but I don't think anyone's expecting a lunge from that far
Three
back.
wide, almost in the grass. He would have never made the corner,
No.
even if Kimi had given him room.
Yeah,
He'd have hit Kimi if Kimi had stayed a lane out.
And I hate that for Räikkönen. How about that Alfa Romeo bouncing way up in the air? Like, the right side tires were 5 feet off the ground, and that car finished the race. Yeah. Now, it wasn't that quick, but he still finished the race. Poor Kimi, he didn't really get a chance to show what he had because he had a great qualifying run.
Yes, he did.
The rumor up and down the paddock was that Mercedes was worried about Alfa Romeo attacking them from the rear and messing up their pit strategy when they were trying to put the pincer move on Ferrari at the front. However, that threat was neutralized by the Flying Dutchman flying into La Source, the first corner at Spa-Francorchamps, and Max still drove away, which I don't understand why he'd go at speed into Eau Rouge.
You
can
don't
see that the suspension is broken on the left front, and you knew which car was in the fence. Even when they were shooting the leaders, there was a collective groan from the Dutch fans. They take over that joint, and even though Max crashed out on the first lap, I don't think anybody left. It was the same way at Austria when I went in 2017. He crashed out on the first corner. There was an entire grandstand of orange shirts, and they didn't budge until the race was over.
And they switched their alliance over to the newest member of the Red Bull team, to Alexander Albon, who had a rather unauspicious start. I mean, he didn't really do anything. He just kind of sat back there, didn't pass anybody. But once they got him in on a pit stop and he was able to charge, I don't know if the report is that both of them raced their pre-France Honda engine. They weren't running the latest, greatest engine, which is a little bit odd to me when you would need that kind of horsepower. They went backwards. Maybe it was a reliability thing. Maybe they want to save that engine for later in the year and don't want to put the extra miles on it at a track where they know they're probably, from an aero standpoint, going to be slow anyway. But Albon, once he started to attack late in the race, really went to the front fast.
He was brilliant. He was cautious when he needed to be. He was forceful when he needed to be. And he inherited the 5th spot. Obviously, I think what Red Bull did was smart on multiple levels. So they had to take a big grid penalty by introducing a new engine to the pool. But a lot of people did this, took a penalty by introducing the engine, but then didn't use that engine. And here's why you do that, Tony. This is a track where you can actually pass. This isn't Singapore, where you're basically bottled up wherever you qualify and you need a huge pace advantage to get by somebody. Yeah, it's a horsepower-hungry track, but you can get around somebody, and we saw a lot of failures in practice and qualifying. Giovinazzi had a big kaboom in qualifying, and so did Robert Kubica. He put up a smoke screen that I think is still hovering in the Ardennes forest right now, several days later. So a lot of engine games going on right now. Everybody's bringing upgrades, but you also have to take a penalty sometimes if you exceed your allotted engine thing. So there was a lot of strategy. I thought that Red Bull taking that on Albon's car this weekend was smart because it took some of the pressure off.
Yeah.
The first time out, you don't want to be looking at the timesheet seeing just how badly Max Verstappen spanked you in qualifying. So they kind of knew, hey, this is a moot point. We're going to be starting at the rear. Let's see what kind of recovery drive we can put on.
Yeah.
Because Gasly was qualifying mid-pack and finishing mid-pack.
I thought Gasly looked pretty decent, though, in his return to Toro Rosso. He seemed more relaxed. I thought he raced pretty well in that car.
Yeah, he
and Danny
ninth.
Kvyat had a very good run.
Yeah, Kvyat coming home in 7th.
Yeah, he continues to show a lot of promise. The hard part for him is it's what, second or third time around promise. Like, you only get so many shots at this thing, and obviously
still only
he's not
22 years old.
Yeah, I just can't imagine them bringing him back up again. Obviously, they didn't, so this is kind of where he's at. But another fine run by him, and I thought it worked out really for everybody. I thought both drivers in their new cars impressed.
I think so too. Albon had some dazzling overtakes. He was making moves that I don't think Gasly felt comfortable enough to make in that Red Bull. And it was
one of the things that Christian Horner was disappointed that he didn't do. He didn't take enough chances sometimes to go after it.
Can we talk about the silliest thing I have seen in the DRS era that involved Alexander Albon?
Sure.
Did you see his pass on Sergio Perez on the final lap?
Yes.
Where he went into the grass on the Kemmel Straight. Perez was very forceful. Still got the pass done with his right side tires on. Did you see what set up that pass?
Mm-mm. Or if I did, I don't recall.
They were playing DRS chicken. On the last lap, there was such a huge gap between the cars in front of them and the cars behind them that Perez didn't want to have Albon behind him and pulled over to let Albon by in La Source. Albon refused to pass him. And this is during a race.
That's awesome.
This is on the last lap of a race. Now, I like DRS, even though it is a little gimmicky, but this is horseshit. We're racing. Why are you... It reminds me of, in Martinsville on the short track when they come out of the pit lane and they're all like, no, you first, no, you after you, because no one wants to restart on the outside when the going gets tough there.
But doesn't that bring in some strategy? Isn't that okay?
Credit to the drivers for thinking of it. So Albon jams on the brakes on the apex and lets Perez just trip the DRS detection point before him. So Albon has DRS. They go soaring up Eau Rouge and Raidillon and onto the Kemmel Straight, and that's when Albon just blew him away and took what would become fifth because Lando Norris was dead in the water just behind them.
Man, tough break for McLaren. Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, he was your midfield
He
MVP,
was my
wasn't he?
midfield. And
neither of us really got a chance, so
No.
I think that's a draw. I really liked where Raikkonen was going, though. I thought he would have been a great pick for that after qualifying. And we made our picks before qualifying.
And Sainz was fast, as was Lando Norris. He was the faster of the two McLarens and was on his way to just a tremendous
career best.
Yeah, he was doing great, and then he's like, I'm losing power, I'm losing. Oh no, the anti-stall, his go away. Now tell me if you think this sounds familiar. McLaren now is saying we want way more transparency from Renault over what went wrong with our engine. Does that sound exactly like what Red Bull was saying a while back?
Yeah. Well, they're fighting Renault in the Constructors' Championship, and everyone who has been a customer of Renault while there's a factory team is concerned that, hey, maybe they're playing games with us. I don't think they would fail on purpose, but they wonder if they're getting the best out of Renault. So that's going to be something between Zach Brown and Cyril Abiteboul to figure out in terms of where do they go forward from there. One other thing about Norris, he had the most interesting description of how I describe his day. He was the luckiest driver on the track at the start of the race. He was the most bored driver on the track during the race. And at the end, he was the unluckiest because he went from 11th to 5th after missing that contact between Verstappen and Raikkonen while everyone went wide. He just kind of let it unfold and went blasting up into the 5th position. Then he had a lonely race. There was no one around him. He was well clear of all the cars behind him. And obviously the remaining Mercedes and Ferraris just streaked away from the McLaren. So he didn't have anyone 20 seconds in front of him or behind him until that car ground to a halt on the last lap.
We also need to talk a little bit about, because we've talked about Alfa Romeo a little bit, and I know it may be coming up in your Morse code later when we talk about IndyCar, but an IndyCar regular skipped the race to be a backup driver. That would be Marcus Ericsson, who we've talked about on this podcast many times, is still under contract with Alfa Romeo as their reserve driver. He skipped Portland IndyCar to go to Spa to be a potential backup for Kimi Räikkönen, who apparently injured his foot, some say on a motorbike, doing some motocross thing in the summer break, but he was there. In the end, he doesn't get to drive there. Somebody else drives his car at Indy. We'll save that for the Morse code because that was
the show.
That was heart-wrenching what happened to the reserve driver there. But Marcus Ericsson was kind of a man left out on his own island this weekend.
You feel bad for him to a point. You signed up to be a reserve driver. Sometimes it means missing a race seat in another series. That's the simple fact of it. I felt badly that the circumstances didn't allow him to get into either of those cars. He didn't set foot in the car. But if Kimi Räikkönen and the brain trust at Sauber Alfa Romeo think that there's a chance he can't race, that's exactly what Marcus signed up for. So sorry, not sorry.
It was a unique feeling race just because of what had happened the day before. Congratulations to Charles Leclerc and Ferrari. Obviously, in my household, we were very happy. We had our Vettel stuff on, so we were disappointed that it was Charles who got the win, but no denying it when we talked about who the fastest of the Ferrari drivers is. As we speak, it's Charles Leclerc, so it was exciting for them to get a win just under what would be, muted circumstances. Hopefully they had a chance to celebrate later at that evening, maybe a little bit on their own, and he had a chance to I hope Charles at least gets to feel some of that thrill, and hopefully he can get a win again soon where
First
he
of
can
many,
properly celebrate. Well, we always say that, but again, things like this happen this weekend. You just never know what's going to happen. One final little Formula One thing to talk about. Well, two things, to be honest. The Haas cars, once again, qualify fine, get out in the race, and are just garbage to the point that they were trying on Grosjean's radio to inspire him to go after the next three cars because they were on worse tires than him. And Eric, it wasn't working on him.
No. He said there is no chance, this is pointless. And that was when he was 12th. Gunter tells him that points are possible. Grosjean says there's no chance and immediately falls to 14th. Here's how bad it is for Haas. They could not have had it go better for them on the opening lap. After that contact, wiping out Verstappen and Raikkonen and also damaging other drivers, I think Ricciardo had to pit, and he went, I think he tried to do 43 laps on one set of hard tires to the end. There was a huge opportunity for Haas after that contact. Grosjean came to the safety car restart in 6th, Magnussen in 7th. And then first it was Magnussen. Tires fell off a cliff, went backwards. Then Grosjean, out of the points. They end up coming home in the 12th and 13th position. They weren't close to points, even though there was an opportunity and they had track position. I think this car just needs to be scrapped. Obviously, there's no saving it at this point.
No, they even got a new spec engine for Ferrari. I mean,
they're going to finish next to last in the Constructors. They're going to be 9th. They're going to beat the Williams, and I think that's it, because Kimi Räikkönen's done a solid job for Alfa Romeo. Both Racing Point drivers are scoring. I just think it's a lost season for Haas at this point. Hope next year's car is better.
Yeah, they've got to figure something out. And there was a quote in here that says, a Haas representative says that a Hülkenberg-Magnussen potential lineup wouldn't be a problem for them because that's two fiery guys. They've had some run-ins in the past.
Wasn't that who he said, suck my balls, honey?
Yeah.
But there's a history there.
But I think the writing's on the wall, unfortunately, for Romain Grosjean. I don't expect to see him back with the team, but we shall see. He's certainly taken a leadership role. As David Hobbs had told us a couple of weeks ago, he felt like he at least was the man to stand up and tell the team we're going the wrong direction, where Magnussen kind of went around along with it. But, tough weekend for Haas. The other piece of news I wanted to bring up to you, and look, I like to stir it up, so it's why I'm going to bring it up, but Fernando Alonso is going to be a guest, and they claim only as a ambassador, but he will be a guest of the McLaren team at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. And they had also called on him as a potential, and I use the word in quotes, potential relief driver should Lando Norris have not been able to drive. But instead of Alonso, they had Sergei Sorokin on standby should Norris have not been able to go. Obviously, he did, as Kimi did. But it's interesting that Alonso just kind of in there. They say he's still part of McLaren. I still feel an IndyCar thing with McLaren and Alonso could happen. This guy's just just never goes away, does he?
He said he's not going to run a full IndyCar season, so he's out for that, as now McLaren is buying into Arrow Smith-Peterson. By the way, it looks like they have confirmed James Hinchcliffe for next year, so they will honor that contract. They said they would, but it looks like those two sides have agreed to make that happen. We know Alonso will not be in IndyCar full-time. I can't imagine a situation where he's not in a McLaren IndyCar for the 500, but I think that's the extent of it. But if you got a driver like that on your payroll, of course you're going to try to work him in. You're going to have him at the racetrack. The fans still respond to him. And if you need him, he's still one of the quickest guys on earth when it comes to a Formula One machine. He's not in Formula One because he was slow. He's in Formula One because I think he lost the passion for it because that McLaren was such a soul-draining pile of suck for the last couple of years. And to their credit, I think Alonso and Stoffel Van Dorn did a great job developing McLaren out of that pile of suck, so now that Sainz and Norris can score points on the regular.
Yeah, it's just the guy's he's always there, and it's interesting. I didn't realize that Sergei Sorokin was their reserve driver. I had no idea about that. Of course, I have no reason to keep up on everybody's reserve driver, but that one caught me off guard a little bit. I know you are always thought he had some talent and maybe didn't get the fairest of shakes, given how bad the Williams was.
Yeah, he was brought in at Williams because he had backing. And I still don't understand how you have two pay-for drivers in Sorokin and Stroll last year and roll out a car that's still so terrible. So if you have that budget, I think they just misspent it. Because, what was it, Claire said a couple weeks ago that the problems that their car fundamentally has wasn't by result of money or lack of funding. Mm-hmm. It was a philosophical mistake in designing the car, and you can't throw money at a problem like that.
All right, Eric. Normally, we don't have to make picks right away after a race, but we're going back-to-back this weekend. They make the jump from Belgium over to Italy, so we have racing this weekend. So we're going to have to give our picks. I let you go first last time. You went with Charles Leclerc as your winner. I went with Lewis Hamilton. This week I'm going to go first, and I'm going to take Charles Leclerc to go back-to-back. I think the Ferraris will be able to easily manage their tires at Monza. I think they obviously have a speed advantage. The whole country will be behind them. I think they lock out the front row again in qualifying, and I think Leclerc drives away. I'm going with Charles Leclerc as my winner. Who do you like as your winner this weekend?
Spotlight on Sebastian Vettel. Time for a comeback for Sebastian Vettel. This is it. He needs to beat Charles Leclerc in this race. I do think that Ferrari should have the measure of the Red Bull and of the Mercedes. I also believe that I read Max Verstappen is due for some grid penalties due to power units.
Back.
So yeah, he probably won't be a factor for the race win. Might charge through, possibly harass some of those cars for a podium finish, because this is another track where you can get some passing done. But I think that Sebastian Vettel needs to prove that he is not the broken man that the global media is portraying him as. This is the perfect opportunity to do so. See what you got, Seb.
Who do you like for your bogey? If it is not Sebastian Vettel, who do you like?
I don't think Lewis Hamilton is considered a bogey pick by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think it's on for the race win, but let's see what Alex Albon can do.
I like that.
I don't know if he'd fight for a podium, but I think top 5 seems attainable for him, even in a straight fight with all of the cars up there. So we'll see if his growth curve continues, as he's basically racing for his job. We know this is a half-season audition for Alex Albon, and he responded well in Spa to that pressure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick. I'm going to go ahead and take Kimi. I'm going to take Kimi Räikkönen. They've got that third generation or that Spec 3 Ferrari engine in there. He certainly looked very fast at Spa. The chassis been quick. Let's see what they can do. If Mercedes was concerned a little bit that Alfa Romeo may have the pace to screw up any of their strategy things that they might be able to do, let's see what Kimi can do as a bogey this weekend. And then let's go to our midfield. I went first last time, so I'll give you first pick at the midfield.
Well, let's see. We didn't get to see what Danny Ricciardo had in Spa because he got tangled up there. He had an engine issue in, I believe it was Germany. I think he needs a bounce-back weekend. It's been a few weeks since he's been able to score points. He's only 1 point clear of his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, and Renault is just kind of floundering right now. I think McLaren is going to be the benchmark to beat. We'll see if Renault can rise to that occasion, and I think Danny Ricciardo is probably the guy to do it, although I will concede I think McLaren is going to have the midfield pace advantage.
Yeah, here's where I want to stay like a broken record, and I would like to say Lando Norris this time around would be where I would look. But you know what? That's too easy, and it's not any fun to do it. So I'm going to throw one out at you. newly signed for 3 years. Oh, they only get signed for 1 year in Formula One, not if you're Checo and you're writing big checks. So let's see what Sergio Perez can do in that pink car at Monza. He might be fun to watch in the midfield. What do you think of that one?
Hey, both Racing Points scored in Spa. Perez led the charge in 6th. He did inherit that.
Were you surprised he got that contract? 3-year
3 years
contract.
is pretty unheard of for a driver in the midfield. They must be very happy with 2 things. One, the backing, obviously. But 2, he is a consistent, known quantity for a team that has always kind of rolled the dice and gone with a counter strategy. He is the perfect driver for that team. He's been able to capitalize on some really unusual strategy gambles. What does he have, 5 or 6 podiums in his career? Maybe even more than that. He is one of those drivers that makes the midfield more exciting because he's in it. So congratulations, Checo.
You know who doesn't like that decision?
Nicholas Latifi.
Latifi, because any idea of an all-Canadian Formula One team, 3 years? That'd be a long time to wait.
Well, there may be an opening at Williams, Nicholas.
Yep, well, that's true.
I think we could see him in the Williams. I can't imagine
There's
that
some other strong candidates there, though.
Latifi looks like he's the strongest guy on the Formula 2 grid right now. There's Guanyang Zhu, but he's a Renault property.
Schumacher's not ready.
And he's not going to drive a Williams.
Ericsson?
He does want to get back in the fold, and I don't think Kubica is completely out of the mix either.
I don't know. I didn't think so either. I thought he was a good touch for that team. You had the youth, you had the experience, the yin and the yang. I thought it was pretty good. David Hobbs kind of convinced me otherwise. He just doesn't think a guy that just isn't at 100% peak driving ability should be in that car. It just doesn't do Williams any good long term. I'm going to go with the expert on that one, though he claims you're an expert, so we'll split it down the difference, but I don't think he returns.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I do look at Kubica through rose-colored glasses because, full disclosure, he's probably my first favorite driver in F1 when I kind of fell back in love with the sport about 15 years ago. He was just coming onto the scene. And
he had as much talent as anybody.
He still does.
Had he not had that what he can do, considering he's, arguably not 100%.
Yeah, I do think that
he can.
A veteran presence at Williams is very important right now to try to figure out what's wrong and how can it be fixed. By the way, they put Latifi in that car for free practice 1. I don't know if you got to see FP1 from Spa. Mm-hmm. Latifi, right about the same time as Kubica. Now, he is a young guy. He doesn't have a huge amount of experience, but he's not blowing his doors off right away. I think that it's hard to judge where Kubica really is right now because I think Russell is just dynamite.
By the way, did you see Juan Pablo Montoya on the grid?
He has been hanging out at Racing Point for quite some time.
He's been his driving coach.
Oh, what's his son's name? Sebastian?
Yeah.
Yeah. I swear he must be angling to get him to be the replacement when Perez's 3-year contract is up. Because Montoya,
take those angles.
Yeah, Montoya, apart from his IMSA duties, has been it's the 3rd or 4th race I've seen him at this year, and he always seems to be hanging around those Pink Panthers at Racing Point.
Yeah, he is. Oh, goodness, we're at 38 minutes. All right, let's take our first break. Wow. Hopefully you've made it.
First break? I hope there's only one.
Yeah, there is only one, our first and only break. Let's take our break now. We'll come back with the Morse code report, which I know includes IndyCar. Stay tuned for that.
Here's your chance to win a set of your very own Hercules tires. Go to HerculesTires.com/MRN. Simply register, and each month we'll give away 1 set of tires. Hercules Tires has the value, selection, and industry-leading mileage coverage to get you wherever you need to go, no matter where the road takes you. Register now for your chance to win a set of Hercules tires at HerculesTires.com/MRN. Hercules Tires. Ride on our street.
And we're back here on American Racing Snobs, and let's jump right into it. It's Eric Morse with his Morse code report.
Well, there was an awful lot of racing on this Labor Day holiday weekend here in the States. Most of the attention was towards Spa-Francorchamps, but there was some other stuff going on. Indycar had their penultimate round at Portland, and
I've actually been to that race.
Have you?
Yes, I have.
I have not been to the great state of Oregon. How is it?
It's amazing.
That racetrack looks really cool. I just remember that drag race they had back in the day. Was that Mark Blundell? racing the Forsyth back in the day from the helicopter shot. I always have good memories of this track. I was so thrilled to see it come back onto the circuit last year.
I'm not a huge fan, much like I am when it comes to Monza. I don't like that artificial chicane on the opening lap. I don't have a problem with it once they're up to speed and spread out. I just don't like jamming side-by-side cars in there, and we saw why at the start of this race.
For the second straight year, we've had a Turn 1 pileup. For the second straight year, it's taken out James Hinchcliffe. That poor guy. He had pretty good pace in practice. Didn't get the qualifying lap he wanted and started 8th, but he was super optimistic, especially with his one-off teammate. We mentioned Ericsson was over in Belgium for the F1 race as a reserve driver. Connor Daly, friend of the show, gets the call-up. I mean, that's a dream team if you're looking for personality on the IndyCar grid. Hinchcliffe and Connor Daly, teammates at Schmidt-Peterson, the Aero cars, go into Turn 1, and neither of them make it out, courtesy of Graham Rahal. What the hell was he thinking? That was a video game move.
He took full credit for it and apologized to everybody, and I hated it for Connor Daly because Connor sent out a tweet saying that this was basically the most important drive that he's had in his career. This was a career move. There were a lot of people saying that he's on that McLaren potential want list, and this was a chance to show in really good equipment what he could do, and just to be riding along and all of a sudden just get smacked. Tough break for everybody out there, but my heart just goes out to Connor Daly because he obviously qualified really well, and
I think he was 9th, like 1/10 of a second off of
brand
James
new car,
Hinchcliffe.
brand new team. You probably gave it a little bit of a conservative effort in the qualifying to make sure you at least get a decent starting spot and don't
want to toss it in the wall on your big audition.
Just
and then
didn't even get a chance.
And then I think it was Zach Veach gets turned by Graham Rahal.
It's
Rahal
such a tight corner. It's ridiculous.
He's a veteran.
Right off the
He
bat.
should know better than to try to stuff it in there like that. If it was Veach, you'd be like, well, it's a young kid. He's only got a year or two under his belt. Mistakes do happen. You don't expect a mistake of that magnitude from someone who's been in this series for 11-plus years. He wasn't the only veteran to make a bonehead move going into Turn 1, though, so he shouldn't feel that bad. This time it was a champion and Indy 500 winner in Ryan Hunter-Reay. Have you ever just spent too much time looking in your mirror and completely blow a corner?
Yes.
In a video game?
No, I've done it. I've done it with go-karts and all sorts of things. Yes.
So
it's easy to do.
You don't expect it from Ryan Hunter-Reay, and this comes at the expense of Jack Harvey, who was running in the 4th position. He had a great qualifying run.
Man.
He was just in front of the melee at the front of the field in the initial start of the race. Get a clean restart, and he's just having his own race with Ryan Hunter-Reay. Hunter-Reay pokes out. Looks like he's looking at his rearview mirror in defending and just completely loses. First of all, he's taken his teammate and championship contender Alex Rossi all the way off the racing line to defend 5th spot on the front stretch. I didn't agree with that. And then he managed to take out the car in front of him because he's so focused on the blue and yellow teammate that's filling his mirrors.
Yeah, he royally screwed up. And again, kudos to him. He took 100% of the blame on it and apologized to that Schenck Racing team who doesn't get many starts. And yeah, it's just tough all the way around. I mean, all the really good guys had bad luck.
Yeah, the guys who
who
had an
needed
opportunity.
It.
The guys who
really
like
a Scott Dixon and Newgarden and those guys, they don't need it.
They're going to be up there
that
every week.
Needed it.
Yeah,
they got hosed.
Yeah, there were 3 or 4 cars running in the top 10 who got taken out by veterans who were driving like rookies. You hate to see that. Now the race finally resumes. By the way, Colton Herta was on pole. Great qualifying lap. He's on the short list to join Andretti Autosport next year because the funding at Steinbrenner Harding is not confirmed for next year. But what is confirmed is Colton Herta is going to be in this series for a long time. He's on everybody's list. And I think Michael Andretti's got first dibs. He's talking about putting 5 full-time cars out there and possibly a 6th for the Indy 500.
If I recall, he was your guy that you said, hey, if you were to, not that he may want to do it or may not want to do it, but if there was a guy I'd look to throw into Formula One and give a chance from this side of the pond.
10 times out of 10, it's Colton Herta.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is the real deal, and he's still in his young formative years. I don't even know if he's turned 20 yet. No, he broke Graham Rahal's record as the youngest winner earlier this year at COTA.
Now, I apologize for interrupting you, but I didn't want to lose my thought. Is it good for IndyCar that Andretti has that many cars? And I'm going to preface this by saying, look, if he can get funding and other people can't, you want as many good teams out there as you can. But as we saw, and I hate to bring NASCAR up because I know our snobby fans don't care for the sport, but we saw in the 80s and early 90s that one team having too many cars and stealing all the sponsorship money because of who they were was actually detrimental for new teams getting in the sport. Is it good for IndyCar that Andretti could have 6 teams, or should IndyCar look at a cap to where maybe a guy can only own 3 teams to try to get some new owners, some new blood into the sport?
Well, if car count was a problem, this is a good solution to have this many good cars out there. That's not a bad thing, and you don't want to see the sport in a state where someone like Colton Herta gets left on the sidelines. Sure. I'd like to see a couple more teams in F1 if they could manage it. We tried a couple years ago to get, 4 new teams were granted entry. Only 3 of them made the grid, and 5 years later, they were all out of business. So I don't think we're at the point where we need to cap it. There is finite sponsor dollars. You do make a good point about that it could be detrimental to, one of the smaller teams like a Dale Coyne or a Harding or Michael Shank, who's trying to make an entry into a full-time team here. We also saw AJ Foyt announced he's losing his sponsorship. ABC Supply is only going to sponsor them at the Indy 500, I think. Okay. So that's a big blow as well. But it's not a bad thing that there's another car that's worth a damn, because it's not like Andretti is running everybody over. Alex Rossi is that
He's
team
the class
right now.
Of the team, yeah.
He is well outpacing former champion Ryan Hunter-Reay. Marco and Zach Veach are fighting for scraps at the outside of the top 10. I know Veach is a young kid, and we haven't really seen what he can do just yet. But really, Alex Rossi, the balance of power in IndyCar could have been shifted drastically if Rossi had gone to Penske, because those cars are fantastic, and Rossi is really elevating that Andretti team and carrying the Honda flag this year. So I think it's a good thing. Colton Herta, looking for his second career win, but they just left him out way too long on his tires. I think the strategy that they were trying to do necessitated that, but they just fell off a cliff. He ended up tumbling down the order. I think he finished in the 4th position. Scott Dixon took the lead, looked like he was going to just creep back into this championship conversation. Wasn't to be. He lost power, lost 3 laps, and that's pretty much it for his championship fight.
That's 2 straight weeks they've had a mechanical issue.
Yep, and Santino Ferrucci also had a mechanical, stopped on the track, and that set up a 5-lap sprint to the finish. Will Power was able to hold off Felix Rosenqvist, who now has a new, shiny Ganassi contract in hand for next year. Congratulations to Felix. Very nearly won Mid-Ohio. Another runner-up finish, so things are starting to come good for the rookie driver. Made his way over from Formula E to the Ganassi squad. Alex Rossi fought up to 3rd position. And now, with 1 race left, Joseph Newgarden has a 41-point lead over Rossi, 42 over Simon. Double points, this is not over by a long shot.
It's going to be interesting.
Especially if Rossi and Pagano are fighting for the win at Laguna Seca, Newgarden can't sleep. There's no points racing. He is going to have to go out and give it everything he has at the finale at Laguna Seca.
In other IndyCar news, were you surprised that Richmond Raceway being added to the schedule, a little short track racing again for the Indy cars?
There's a couple reasons why it was a little bit surprising. We knew that Pocono was possibly on the chopping block based on the end of their contract and some of the things that have happened there over the couple years of their tenure on the schedule. Richmond had a race in the early 2000s. I believe their last race was in 2009, won by Mr. Scott Dixon. The racing there was never that great. And obviously, that was a different year. That was before the DW12, and now we're an aero kit removed from that car as well. And, Tony, these short ovals, Iowa's been pretty exciting the last couple of years. It's hard to predict what's going to work. And just because Richmond didn't produce great racing in the past doesn't mean it can't do it in the future, especially now that we have a completely different aero package and kit for these cars. They wanted to keep this number of ovals on there, especially with the success and the enthusiasm that we saw at Gateway. So not surprised on that front. What I am surprised is maybe the date, because they're going to be, I believe, at the end of June. There's a lot going on at the end of June, especially for motorsports fans. 3 races in the north, or I'm not saying Richmond's northeast, but it does pull from the northeast racing crowd,
Sure.
especially if you're based in Maryland, Pennsylvania, even New York City. It's an easy drive. Same weekend as Richmond. Pocono doubleheader for the Cup Series, first time ever. Watkins Glen, 6 hours for IMSA. All happening on the same weekend. That's
a lot.
That's saturation right there. I like the idea of let's try this, but I'm not sure that date's going to be successful because the casual NASCAR fans are going to see what this doubleheader's about.
Absolutely.
And half the racing snobs in the area are going to be heading north to Watkins Glen.
And that's kind of where I felt on this, and I understand that the IndyCar people do not want to run with NASCAR. I get that. They don't want to play second fiddle. NASCAR's not going to play second fiddle for them. If it's going to happen, they're going to be a support race. But I think it would have been cool if you're going to that type of short track, that the best chance of success, at least from fans in the stands, because I think people are going to tune in if they're IndyCar fans on television or streaming or some other way. But as far as just butts in the seats, I think to have been able to run it the day before, have a Xfinity IndyCar doubleheader, or run it before the Cup race or after the Cup race, I think that had been really, really cool.
I think that,
and I think it would have opened IndyCar up to a different fan base. And I know they don't want that fan base, but, look, at the end of the day,
race fans are race fans, man.
Well,
I think
they
it would have
are,
been
except for
great.
when it comes to NASCAR and any other form of racing that feels like it's too commercial and just not right.
You telling me you're going to turn off Canadian Football League if it's on at the sports bar?
Well, I'm different than you.
Yeah.
I'm a snobby guy that likes everything, right? I never understood the just disdain for MRN when we did Grand Am racing, when nobody wanted to touch Grand Am racing. Now, I get it a little bit when the Le Mans series came in and it became IMSA, that they weren't hearing who they were used to hearing, and I can respect that, but nobody cared about that sport when we were doing it. So I understand that there's this level of passion for and against NASCAR, but I think it would have been a success had they run it together on that particular track.
Especially that
on
particular
that particular
track. I
track.
think that would have helped both parties.
Same with Iowa. I think it'd be a good idea because neither race has the attendance it used to have.
Let's call David.
I don't think that's his call.
A friend of MRN is now president at Iowa Speedway, David Hyatt. They had a great event earlier this year. That IndyCar race was fantastic, and it's been gaining momentum over the years. The racing's getting better.
But still not the crowd you'd want.
No. Hopefully they put on a good show and a good crowd shows up at Richmond. One other note on the IndyCar schedule, talking about conflicts, you see that they actually did work with IMSA to make sure that the Sebring 12-hour did not conflict with, I think it was COTA, initially on the calendar, and a lot of the IMSA teams use IndyCar drivers like Simon Pagenaud and Scott Dixon end up filling in on some of those third driver roles for the endurance races. They were able to keep that date out of conflict with Sebring, as well as out of the Texas Motor Speedway NASCAR weekend. They didn't want to put Austin up against that, even though that seems to happen about half the time with Formula One in the fall. I know Eddie Gossage is not a fan of whenever that happens, because the casual racing fan is now, you're splitting them right down the middle.
Yep.
So common sense won out this time, at least when it came to COTA versus Sebring in Texas. So they got that sorted out. There was one other race, actually two other quick races I want to talk about. World Endurance Championship, Super Season 2.0, season opener at Silverstone. And that was run in changing conditions. And, Tony, there was all kinds of talk about balance of performance, trying to peg
BOP.
back the Toyota. Since they're the only factory squad, the only hybrid out there, they're trying to make it so, hey, maybe these privateers in the LMP1 category can actually fight for a race win. They tacked on, I think it was 13 kilograms of ballast, and the pace looked like, hey, we could have a fight for this thing. However, it was a Toyota 1-2 on a lap of their own, thanks to some mechanical failures for the other privateers, as well as some penalties. It was the Jose Maria Lopez, Kamui Kobayashi, and Mike Conway machine beating Kaz Nakajima, Sebastian Buemi, and newcomer to the team, Brendan Hartley, in the second position there for Toyota Gazoo Racing. In the GT Pro category, there was a Porsche 1-2, which sounds a lot like IMSA. Man, those Porsche 911s are just killing everybody now. Speaking of BOP. There was a weird situation. The AF Corsa Ferrari of James Calato and Pierre Guidi, they had some issues, got off sequence, had a real interesting tire strategy where they were using a different compound, so they couldn't double stint their tires. They go rocketing to the lead, then they get killed. Then they go rocketing to the lead, and just when that yo-yo battle looked like it was going to kind of play out, and just when we thought we knew what was going to happen in the race, they got a drive-through penalty. So they come off the track, and right as they peel off the track, the message comes up on the screens that the stewards changed their mind and rescinded the penalty, but he was already on pit lane, ended up costing them a podium position. It was Aston Martin was the beneficiary of that weird piece of stewarding there at Silverstone.
When was the last time Aston Martin won a race? I haven't been following the series. Maybe they have earlier this year, but...
Well, they're focusing on what's coming because they are one of the few confirmed entries for Le Mans hypercar. I think that's 2021. That we're going hypercars. They're going to have road-going looking cars. Still haven't confirmed many entries. There's only one or two manufacturers, but Aston Martin was the first to say, hey, we're going to build a hybrid Vulcan that's going to run in this hypercar category.
It's like it's been a while for Aston Martin, in my opinion.
Since they won Le Mans, it's been since, 1959? Carroll Shelby at the wheel?
I mean, they had some strong cars 6, 7, 8 years ago. But
they contend for podiums, especially with Paul Dall'Anna and his crew on the GT-AM category. Yeah. So on the pro side, they do compete, but I think they're more of a contender in the amateur category because they have Dall'Anna racing as their bronze driver. That's about as good as you're going to do there. One other race I want to talk about, I know this was throwback weekend if you were in the NASCAR community. How about this for a throwback headline? Andretti and McLaren win Watkins Glen.
What?
Jared Andretti, friend of the show, son of John Andretti, a former host of this show, won the Blancpain Endurance GT4 race, number 2, Sunday at Watkins Glen.
Wow.
And John was there. I was glad his health allowed him to travel and be there for this very special inaugural victory for yet another generation. This is a third generation. He's actually Aldo's grandson. Aldo, if you don't know, is the twin brother of Mario Andretti. So congrats to the entire Andretti clan, especially John and Jarrett. Long time coming, well-deserved, and you can't think of a better track for it to come at. Classic.
Awesome stuff, Eric, as always. All right, let's just review for the Monza GP, the Italian Grand Prix this weekend. It's going to be Leclerc as your winner, Kimi your bogey, and Perez your midfield MVP. At least that's how I see it. Eric says it's going to be Sebastian Vettel getting back to victory lane. If not, Alex Albon. Probably not going to win the race, but want to see what he can do, see if he can get up on that podium. And Danny Ricciardo will be the guy in the midfield that will be on the move. It's going to be a lot of fun. And as always, next week, we will break that down and all the other racing action. For Eric Morse, I'm Tony Rizzuti. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a comment. We love to see them. And as always, we'll talk to you next time on this and every episode of American Racing Snobs.